Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Croí Connect series. My name is Neil Johnson, and this is actually the last in our series of this year, and my first, in fact, in the host chair. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Mary Hynes, who's going to join us as we talk about the topic of stress management and its effect on cardiovascular disease. Mary is Senior Clinical Psychologist for Bariatric Services at Galway University Hospital. Mary, delighted to have you with us, and thank you so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here this morning. Thank you.
We have a lot of questions, Mary, so I was going to suggest that we just get straight into the discussion, if that's okay. I suppose the first obvious question is, when we talk about stress, sometimes the term stress and anxiety are used interchangeably. Can you tell us what exactly is stress, what is anxiety, and how are they related?
Yeah, well, we now know in the field of psychocardiology, which is the study of the psychological aspects of heart disease, that there's a coexistence and a very high prevalence of cardiovascular disease and mental health issues, most notably anxiety disorders. And stress plays a critical role in the cause and progress of both. So, rightly so, asking what is stress? It's actually often been described as a feeling of being overwhelmed by your day-to-day activities, having that kind of backward climate of just having a lot of work hanging over. We know now that not all stress is bad. It can actually motivate us to get a task finished or perform well. We all experience stress, but it becomes harmful if we become overstressed or if it's prolonged. And that's when we use the term chronic stress or cumulative stress. And this can have very adverse effects on our body's immune system, cardiovascular, blood pressure, anxiety, and sleep difficulties, and also with mental health issues like anxiety and depression. So stress triggers that kind of fight or flight, freeze system through the sympathetic nervous system. So how it differs from anxiety, now there's a very thin line between stress and anxiety. Both are emotional responses, but stress is typically caused by an external event. It can be a trigger that's short term, maybe like a work deadline or a row with a friend, or more long term, being unable to work or financial difficulties. Anxiety, really, on the other hand, is more defined by ongoing, that cumulative stress, excessive worries that don't go away, even in the absence of those external demands. So the focus of anxiety really is more internal. It's rather than external. So people often describe this kind of free-floating anxiety, that sense of impending doom, that something bad is going to happen, and it may come out of the blue. So it can appear really in very different forms. So you could have a very low level intensity of anxiety, like a twinge of uneasiness, or a full-blown panic attack, which really is heart palpitations, disorientation, even terror, which is very unpleasant. But I suppose the one point about anxiety, it's the most common mental health issue. It affects 20% of the population, but it's the most treatable. So that's good news. But anxiety can be brought on by even just thinking about our worries. That's called anticipatory anxiety. And people may very much worry themselves into a frenzy. And as you were saying, how would you know what the signs of anxiety are? And it's very important to get to know what your own personal signs are. So very much cognitively, you may have concentration difficulties, memory difficulties. You may find yourself feeling very overwhelmed or worrying all the time. Emotionally, people around you might find that they're tiptoeing around you. You're very moody, very agitated, or sometimes withdrawing from your friends, feeling quite isolated. Behaviorally, we might start eating more, drinking more, or eating less, sleeping more. Might start, a lot of nervous behaviors like nail biting, smoking, or pacing around the place. And very physically, then people describe a lot of pains in their muscles, stomach pains, aches, headaches, and even rashes. We can break out in rashes. So really important to know your own personal telltale signs. What one person's telltale signs may be very different to somebody else's.
Yeah, so we've lots of very specific questions, but before we get into them, Mary, just to sort of clarify, what you're describing here is in terms of stress, it's something that's happening in our minds, but actually it has a physiological response.
Yes, absolutely. So as I said, stress is normal, but if it becomes more chronic, and if we're having like long-term sleeping difficulties, substance abuse issues, mood issues, they can actually translate into more significant mental health issues like anxiety, depression, and as we said, the more physical responses as well, such as cardiovascular disease, obesity, lowered immune system. So very important that we address stress in our lives.
And sometimes, one last question on the stress specifically, sometimes, people find it difficult to accept that they're actually under stress and they don't realize it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and this is, I suppose, why we started off just giving the telltale signs of stress. We all like to think, particularly in this, high pace world where people are very kind of busy, over scheduling, that we can cope with everything. And people feel it's almost a sign of weakness if you take a break or relax. So I suppose it takes a lot of courage, really, to face the fact, to name the fact that you're feeling stressed. I would suggest to a lot of people that, on a weekly basis, or certainly at least on a monthly basis, you tune into yourself, you check these symptoms of anxiety, even to get a stress report scale, tick them off and see, what are your early telltale signs. For most people, I find their early telltale signs is sleeping difficulties, or worrying, excessive worrying, or changing in their eating behavior. But as I said, rashes, aches and pains, headaches, we can actually, if we don't tune in, we can go through a whole day, have a splitting headache. And I think also to ask people around us, particularly with the moodiness, the irritability, the agitation, people around us may notice it before we do.
Yeah, I think you make a very important point there about, facing up to the fact that you might be stressed or feeling anxious, to actually have the courage to, to reach out to others, to convey to others that you're not feeling 100%, because therein, of course, lies one of the biggest problems. People just carry it with them, and there's this sense that it's a weakness when in fact it's like any other illness. You need to respond to it. So if I can move to some of the specific questions that have come into us, Mary, in advance of this conversation. The first one, it relates to somebody obviously who has had a cardiac event, and they're saying that I can't deal with everyone looking at me as a sick person. I feel like I'm going mad. I suppose it's something there about the loss of control. Would you respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, this is a really common response for all people with all chronic health issues, But for most people, living with a heart condition will change the way they live their life. And it will also affect your family and friends. So this is the reality. And we know, although there is support, and care and treatment from the formal health services or services such as Croí, friends and family will be a crucial part in that long-term management. So more than managing, your own stress and anxiety and having to adapt then to those lifestyle changes. Family around you are worried, and they are concerned, and this is normal. But with time, people will adapt and gain confidence in themselves, and their family and friends around them will also gain confidence in their own ability to self-manage. And then at that point, people will gain again that kind of sense of control around their life. But it is a process, and it does take time, and it does take patience. But this can result to, just as that person explained, feelings of frustration, that loss of former roles that you spoke about there. And that can, lead to maybe feelings of anxiety, anger, guilt, and even shame. That, and what actually is happening behind those feelings is that people's threat systems have been activated. Our threat brain, which very much goes into that fight or flight, and that's where you could be annoyed with people around you, is beginning to run the show. And it might make you question people's judgments around you, and make you more sensitive to other people. So again, this calls for courage and radical acceptance skills. That we do know, unfortunately, in life, change, suffering, and death are our kind of coming attractions in life. But despite us wishing things to be different in the moment, it doesn't change the reality of the situation. So again, often people might need some support, whether it's through support groups, people going through, a very similar situation that can be very helpful in terms of adapting and changing to the new roles. And that kind of feeling, like I feel like I'm going mad, that's very much your Trek brain running the show. And then you can very much feel overwhelmed by all the changes. So very, very difficult, and again, takes a lot of need of support, but maybe patience with family members, and the need to kind of radically accept those changes also.
Okay, thank you. Next question, obviously somebody who's had a heart attack and has either directly or indirectly attributed the heart attack to stress. And the question is that I'm due to go back to work next month and I'm dreading it. I know my stress levels will go through the roof again, and I'm very scared this will lead to another heart attack. What tips would you give on how to manage that stress-related anxiety?
Well, Neil, this is yet again a very important question, as this is probably one of the most common statements I would hear from people after any chronic health issues. And I would always say to people, like, we have to kind of make work for us in the long term, particularly after having some significant health issues. But, when people talk about, going back to work, again, this can really bring up a lot of anxieties. This is, I suppose, how I mentioned earlier about how important it is to identify your triggers to stress. So if going back to work is one of your triggers, it's important for us to learn maybe how to practice calming yourself down beforehand. Seeing how would you know you're stressed. So very early on, I would suggest to people before they go back to work is to start trying to establish some routines. We know that having predictable routines, knowing routines in our day over the week can be very calming and reassuring. So it's very important for people to start getting up at the same time, not just waiting till they start work, and having regular times for meals and waking and bedtimes. So sometimes people might need some support on time management skills. So again, also to be aware of kind of anxious self-talk. Notice your self-talk, like, I can't cope. I'm not going to be able to cope with going back to school. What if I lose control? What if I have another heart attack? These are all very legitimate kind of feelings people have, but to learn to recognize it, to be aware of it, be conscious of it, to replace it with more calming statements, more positive self-thought, to realize that this is a trigger. But you may also need to talk to your employer or HR before returning to work, as well as your medical team, just to find out what's best for you, and what will actually work best for you.
So following on the thread of calm there, our next question sort of falls in nicely here. It's how do I incorporate stress management into my busy daily routine and lifestyle? Everybody today talks about, a hectic lifestyle. What are the common recommendations to bring that calm into your life?
Yeah, and I suppose one thing we know about stress is that people feel very overwhelmed, and often when we talk about incorporating stress management into their busy routine, it just seems like another task for them. Research shows that people who tend to be very task orientated in their life, that can lead to kind of high stress levels and low mood. So very often people would say, I don't have time to relax. Now research shows really that all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So it's very important to give sufficient prioritization to stress management. Often people might say as well, oh, relaxation is boring. And this often is a very good indication that you're too speeded up maybe in life, that you're over scheduling, that you're too frantically pushing yourself through life. So I suppose really the first step is for people is to be aware of the pace and that over scheduling, and learn how to slow down. And this is very typical in people who would have very high drive or that kind of type A personality. And really what it is about trying slowly to bring balance back into your life. Now, you can't do this overnight. And this is, again, what people do. They think they have to change everything now. It has to start with small steps. So you schedule slowing down time. This is time out from work, time out from tasks and responsibilities. It's an opportunity to rest and replenish, or rest and digest, as we call it. You need to replenish your energy, because without this, the stress you will be experiencing will become cumulative stress or chronic stress, which we know, as we said earlier, that's what actually leads to anxiety and depression. So very much, and also to say sleep doesn't count as downtime. So really what is that we would aim to get people to start with maybe 15 minutes with a view to it becoming 1 hour per day, 1 day per week, and 1 week out of 12 to 16 weeks, and to monitor the relaxation, the recreational time, and to reward it. So after you've met those kind of goals, you might reward yourself with new clothes, a weekend away. And you need, in that downtime, you need recreational time. That's fun, that's not tasks, to replenish your energy, recreate it. Relationship time to connect with other people. And we know that connecting with other people is a great buffer for stress. Very important is learning to say no to demands for new tasks. And sometimes people might need professional help in assertiveness training. We also look at perfectionistic traits and try to people to get them to learn that good enough is good enough. And of course, what we all realize is important is exercise. And again, we get people to start slowly, one step at a time. It'll be maybe 10 minutes every second day, and then every subsequent week you would add another 5 minutes. That you're building up all your resources to buffer stress.
So very practical advice there, Mary, actually talking about timetabling time out, which is so important. We forget to do it. Just in relation to those options, do you have any particular views, or are you an advocate of use of yoga, mindfulness, meditation? What are your thoughts on those?
Absolutely. I suppose what I would say to people is, I think once you have maybe a cardiac event, there can be a lot of people giving you unsolicited advice. And I think they say, oh, mindfulness works for me, or, I find, hill walking is fantastic. I think you have to find your own ways of that time out. For some people, it's yoga. Other people, it's swimming in the sea. Another person, it's through painting or art. But I think, again, like we said, that the research shows that too many tasks leads to low mood. So we don't want it to become another task. We want it to be kind of fun. So a lot of people would try different things. I even saw on the National Health Service in England have put belly dancing classes up on their website for people. So it's a fun way of exercising. It's not another task. But also, as I said, it could be Irish dancing classes. It could be, as you said, a poetry class, an art class, learning an instrument, doing something that's totally different, that's time out. And then, if you find yoga good, other people find Tai Chi good, or some people just like going for a walk by the sea, golf. So it's to find what works for you. And I know people are being helpful. I had one client there last week saying, oh, my sister in America rang me and she said, well, if you're feeling that stress, why don't you just go for a walk? And the same lady said to her, if walking would have worked for me, I'd walk to Cork and back, but it just doesn't work for her, So it's about finding what works for you. We all have something that works best for ourselves, and then to prioritize it and to ensure that it happens regularly.
question in relation to somebody getting a diagnosis. Actually, in this case, it was a diagnosis of familial hypercholesterolemia, which is a genetic predisposition to elevated cholesterol, which obviously there's a strong link between that and a premature cardiac event or death. So this individual has received this diagnosis. It's obviously taken them by surprise and perhaps shock. And the question is, how do I regain my confidence now and move on from this diagnosis?
Yeah, and I suppose this is a very important factor in relation to symptoms of depression. Particularly when we're faced with these stressful events, individuals who may already have low confidence or low self-esteem, particularly if they've been overworked and feeling stressed, they're seen to possess fewer coping resources sometimes, and therefore can be more vulnerable to the development of psychological symptoms such as we said, cumulative stress, anxiety, or depression. As opposed to people who would have maybe high self-esteem, they're buffered against this. So there's a lot of research now looking at the area of self-compassion and self-care. We're now beginning to realize the role of high self-criticism and high self-monitoring in the area of maintaining depression or maintaining anxiety or maintaining low self-esteem. So it's very important for people to learn how to prioritize themselves, to start being aware of maybe some of that high monitoring, that high anxiety, that anxious self-talk that's going on. We often get people to look at maybe getting rid of a lot of dead, depleting or kind of damaging relationships in their life, and to spend more time with people who care and share similar value systems. So at that time, be very much getting people to access their local supports, like their friends and families and work colleagues, to maybe learn some skills on that positive self, take care and self-soothing. A simple task that we often get people to do is that they develop a kind of a compassionate self-aid box, where it might be just some ideas if they're feeling very overwhelmed by their diagnosis or coping with changes in life. And it could be, a relaxation CD that they play, candles, music they'd listen to, the numbers of friends they could ring, access to support groups. So it's very much, that's very important to gain your confidence, is to look at maybe how you're talking to yourself. So we always say to people, be careful how you talk to yourself because you're listening. Very much after such a diagnosis, it can lead to a lot of self-monitoring, comparing yourself to other people unfairly, really. The only fair comparison we can ever do in life is if we randomly compare ourselves to every fifth person walking past us. But instead, we tend to compare ourselves, to the high achievers, to the healthiest people, to the people who are doing best in life. So I suppose, again, it's just watching that self-critic, learning to become more compassionate, more kind to yourself, and surrounding yourself with people and colleagues who also share that value system and are concerned and supportive of you.
Very good practical advice there. Conscious of time, Mary, I've so many questions. We're not going to get through them all, but there is one here that is definitely a question we get a lot, and probably no harm to address it in this context. And it relates to intimacy post-cardiac event. So in this case, the questioner says that he and his wife are having problems with intimacy secondary to his erectile dysfunction. How common is this, and how should he go about discussing it with his doctor or healthcare professional?
Yeah, and it's an excellent question, because any serious health problem can impact your relationship and your intimacy, not just cardiac events. And many people worry about relationships following a diagnosis of a heart condition or heart disease, because it can change the way you see yourself as a person. And this is where we spoke in the previous question, how you criticize yourself, how you compare yourself to other people, and your place in the home or you're within the family. And this can lead to low confidence and low mood. So in terms of stress management, basically the most important area here is discuss the proverbial elephant in the room. You know, we have to talk about it. And, you know, research, they're doing a huge amount of research now in repressing our emotions, not talking about our feelings, not talking about our concerns, and the lack of open and honest communication. This is really linked to high stress levels, you know. So our relationships with partners can be very important as well in supporting us or the person who's living with heart disease, as can the relationships with friends and families. So it's very important, as I said, to set aside time, again, like the stress management, to prioritize it. Talk to your partner about the concerns you're having or the difficulties you're having, and a healthcare professional if you're worried. They're well used to hearing these concerns. This is their bread and butter, really, in terms of their practice. And if you're feeling a bit, you know, nervous a bit about it, or a bit insecure, you know, you maybe talk to a close friend first, a family member or one of your closest friends. And if there are physical problems, just like in this case, that are causing you problems, such as the erectile dysfunction, discuss them with your health professional. They will be able to tell you what your limits are, and also they will also be able to give you some reassurance. So as I said, the most important issue here is to not repress your feelings, because that will lead to increased levels of stress. You're already under enough stress with the changes of roles. Discuss the elephant in the room.
So I think that's very reassuring. I mean, what you're telling us, this is common, and we know that from our own experience as well. It is important to talk to somebody. And as you say, there's nothing here that your doctor or nurse hasn't heard before. So you're not the first to present with this. Mary, this has been really, really powerful conversation, a lot of positive messages here. If you were to sort of conclude with some take-home messages for people with high levels of stress and anxiety, what would they be?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing is, no matter how powerless or stressed you feel, change is always possible. So the first point I always say to people is ask for help and support. There is support out there from family and friends, or for professional support groups, or services such as Croí, or, you know, attend a group where people are going through the same experiences. A problem shared is a problem halved. Try not to let your emotions run the show, such as anxiety and, you know, that anxious self-thought. Practice mindfulness, relaxation, deep breathing exercises. You know, they lower your blood pressure, your heart rate. Become more conscious of your triggers of anxiety or stress, because then we can plan for a more calm response to them. Develop healthier eating habits. And in the area I work with, we see a lot of people emotionally overeat in response to stress. Take regular exercise to reduce your stress, which also will reduce the hormone cortisol, which is very important in the area of heart disease. Learn how to slow down. As I said, make work for you. That rest, to allow yourself to replenish your energy, and not to allow stress become cumulative. Be aware of perfectionism, you know, that or excessive need for approval, or the tendency to ignore your physical and psychological signs of stress, those telltale signs. Plan days off, try not to overschedule, and be very careful, as I always say, saying yes to distant elephants. And that's one of the biggest time management skills, I say, because from a distant, elephants look very small, but when they come up close, they're very big, and that can very much overwhelm you. So again, be kind to yourself, be compassionate, but really stay close to your friends and family, because they really will be, in most cases, the most supportive in helping you get through stress.
Thank you, Mary. And unfortunately, due to time constraints, we're going to have to cut it here. We have many unanswered questions. Perhaps we can resume again at some time in the future and follow up on this subject, which is obviously of great interest to people. This actually concludes the Croí Connect series for this year. We will, of course, be returning early in the new year. And in advance of that, I would encourage any of you who have questions that you would like answered to email them to us or post them on our social channels. You can do so on the Croí website or on our social media platforms. And keep an eye out on the Croí website and social channels for when the next series will be presented. That's it for now, for this year. I hope you have a healthy and safe Christmas, and we look forward to connecting with you next year. Goodbye.